What's up, dude? If you've ever ended up with a gray, dry, bland looking steak, odds are you're making one of these 11 mistakes. And I've made plenty of videos showing you how to nail a perfectly cooked pan-fried steak, but I realized I've never actually shown you what not to do. So today I'm breaking down 11 of the most common mistakes people make and exactly how to fix them. Now let's go! Now the first thing you definitely don't want to do is choose a steak with terrible marbling. Let me explain. First of all, if you're not even familiar with what marbling is, it's this intramuscular fat that runs through the meat. And it shows up in this sort of lightning pattern of white fat that runs through the muscle tissue of your steak. And so when you choose a steak that doesn't have good marbling, essentially you're just choosing a leaner piece of steak. And by choosing lean steak, it means a couple things. You're gonna have less flavor and you're gonna have a chewier steak. It's really as simple as that. So when you have a steak like this with great marbling, the intramuscular fat melts as the steak cooks, sort of basting the meat from within. And that's gonna add that rich, buttery, beefy taste that we all know and love. Lean steaks just can't provide that. I mean, just take a look at these two steaks right here. They are both ribeyes. Which one of these would you choose? I think the answer should be pretty obvious. And on a final note, I highly recommend you buy a thicker steak if you can. Because if you buy a thin and lean steak like this ribeye, for example, by the time you get a sear on that thing the way you want it, it may be already overcooked. You want a big steak so you just have time to work with it without it overcooking. The second thing you don't want to do is season that steak too closely. I'll explain. And I see a lot of amateur cooks season their steak from right above the steak, which basically just means you're not going to distribute that salt evenly over the steak. Instead, get real chefy with it and season it from high above, which just gives you this good distribution. It's got a good spread. And I'm seasoning the steak with rosemary salt, if you know you know, which is definitely a little bit more clumpy than just your regular kosher salt, but if you try this with regular kosher salt, you will see a huge difference from seasoning it high above. And the third thing you definitely don't want to do is use really coarse, big pieces of pepper, and there's a good reason for this. And some people may argue with me on this one, but when you're using a huge chunk of pepper like you see right here, it essentially lifts the steak off the pan. And if your steak's not touching the pan, you're not getting a good sear. And if you're not getting a good sear, you're not getting good flavor, which is the whole point of cooking, right? Instead, I recommend you go for a finer ground when it comes to applying pepper to your steak so you maintain that perfect contact with the pan, which will give you that beautiful sear you're looking for. And because you seasoned your steak up high, now when you go to flip your steak over, you can dip up all those edges of the salt and pepper when flipping to the other side. You definitely want seasoning on those edges as well. I'll also just give it a little tap with my hand to help that seasoning really stick to the beef. And sometimes I'll even rub the steak down with a little bit of oil before to sort of act like a binder to help the seasoning stick. But if your steak's super marbled like this one, that fat will actually just grab it by itself. And another little pro tip I can share with you today is if you're using really quality beef, it tends to fall apart a lot easier while cooking. So taking a piece of butcher's twine and tying it around the middle like this can really help hold the steak together. Doing this will also make the whole steak more evenly thick, which in turn will also help it cook nice and even throughout. On another note, if you truly want to make a quality steak, then you really need a quality pan like this carbon steel frying pan from the sponsor of today's video, Made in Cookware. And I've been using Made in's carbon steel cookware long before they were ever a sponsor of this channel. They have become true essential pieces of equipment in my kitchen. And thanks to Made in's outstanding quality and performance, they have been used in over 2,000 top-rated hotels and restaurants across America. And I love that they partner with multi-generational factories and artisans to create products that are just a joy to use. And if you've ever considered switching to clean, uncoated cookware, then Made in's carbon steel collection is truly a great choice. And to me, and I know a lot of pro chefs would agree with this one, with carbon steel, you get the best of two worlds. You'll get that cast iron-like heat retention while also getting the ease and maneuverability of a stainless steel pan. And these award-winning frying pans are crafted in Sweden at a family-owned factory that has been producing carbon steel since the late 1800s. And personally, whenever I'm cooking any protein, whether it be beef, pork, lamb, fish, scallops, doesn't matter, I'm always reaching for that carbon steel pan. You can check out the carbon steel collection as well as all my other favorite cookware from Made in by clicking the link down in the description. Thank you, Made in, for sponsoring this video. Now back to the recipe. The fourth thing I highly advise against is using a pan that's not hot enough. Because what you don't want to do is just set your pan over the flame, wait a few seconds, then add your oil and start cooking right away, thinking that somehow you'll magically get a sear on it. I mean, there's barely a sizzle, there's no smoke anywhere around here. This isn't good. This feels so wrong. All I do is start by setting my carbon steel pan over medium-high heat. So that's 3 minutes, almost on full blast. Now I add the oil. We wait another 30 seconds. You see the smoke coming off here. There's a good amount, but it's not insane. Now we start cooking. And for safety, whenever you're cooking any kind of protein, you want to
lay it away from you so if any of that oil splashes, it doesn't go on you.
The fifth amateur move I see all the time is people just flipping and flopping their meat. They can't seem to just let it sit there and cook, which is what it needs to do.
Because if you're constantly moving your meat around in the pan, you're just losing the heat that you need to give it a proper sear, to give it the proper color and flavor that you deserve. And on another note, searing your steak properly without moving it around is really what helps that seasoning form a crust on the steak. And so if you try to move your steak too early without letting it sear first, a lot of that seasoning is going to come off right on the pan. And then if you combine this with not letting your pan get hot enough first, essentially that steak is just steaming down there, which also loosens that seasoning. I mean, it's just a lose-lose situation. And if I'm cooking a big steak like the one I have here today, I'm not checking that thing for at least 2.5 minutes to see if it's got a nice sear on it. There's no reason to check it any earlier than that. And so after a few minutes of searing, and when I'm really feeling confident that the steak has got a nice sear on it, all I'll do then is lift the steak and tilt the pan so some of that oil will run back underneath the steak. And another thing you can do at that point to make sure you get a really great sear is just move the steak to another side of the pan. Because as your steak sears, it actually takes energy away from the part of the pan it's touching, and by moving it to the other side, you get more heat, thus more sear, thus more color, thus more flavor. And so what I like to do for my steaks is get a really good sear on that first side and then sear the other side for about half the amount of time before taking it out to rest. And for me, what this does is allow the temperature inside the steak to equalize before basting. It's almost like a little rest halfway through cooking, which will just give you that edge-to-edge perfection. And now to move into some of the most fun parts of cooking a great steak at home, and that's the whole basting process, which leads me to my next issue.
The sixth mistake I see all the time is people peeling their garlic before basting with it. There's a really good reason I don't do this.
And look, it's not the end of the world if you have peeled garlic, but I like to crush the garlic and leave that shell on, because in doing so, the shell acts like a protective barrier, so when you're basting with the garlic, it doesn't burn, but still releases all of its flavor.
The seventh mistake I see people make is adding their aromatics all at once.
And so what I see a lot of people do when it comes to the basting process is they'll throw in the butter and all the aromatics all at once. And look, if you're a really busy restaurant, maybe you don't have time to do it another way, but if you're cooking it at home, you might as well follow the proper order. And so what I like to do when my steak is resting after that initial sear is, while leaving the heat somewhat high, I'll start by searing off the half shallots until they have some nice color on them. Then I can simply add the butter and the peel on garlic before starting my basting process. And for the thyme or whatever fresh herbs you happen to use, could be rosemary, could be sage, I really only add these in the last minute of basting. They're fresh herbs, they're gonna burn really quick.
The eighth mistake I see people make, and I've even seen a lot of pro cooks doing this one, is piling all these aromatics on top of their steak while basting. There's a good reason you don't want to do that.
And this would be a lot easier to demonstrate had we got a really good sear on our steak, but essentially what happens if you put all your aromatics on top of the steak and then start spooning hot butter all over it is you'll be creating a whole bunch of steam and moisture coming out of all those aromatics all over your steak. And if you have a good sear on your steak, all that moisture will wash it away. I've seen this happen in real time so many times.
The ninth mistake I see people make all the time is basting with the butter too early when it's not hot enough.
And because there's a lot of cream left over from the butter making process and you haven't let it properly foam, you're putting a bunch of wet stuff all over the top of your steak, which washes off the sear, which is all the flavor. It's a sad, sad sight.
The 10th mistake I see people make all the time is basting with their butter when it's actually burned. They let their pan get too hot during that basting process.
That's right. So on the flip side of basting too early, you can baste too late or baste with the pan too hot, which means your butter is burned and you're gonna pull out some very interesting flavors, to say the least. Instead, just keep the heat a touch over low, and when you see that butter nice and foamy and brown, it should look just like this. Then and only then do you start basting with your steak. We want a nice nutty flavored brown butter here and not anything that's too burned.
And the 11th and final mistake I see people make is actually not resting their steak. I'm gonna prove to you right now why you should definitely do it.
And so with my mistake steak, I sliced it right when it came out of the pan. Maybe 30 seconds had passed before slicing into this thing. And while it actually doesn't look too terrible, you can definitely see this dark gray ring on the outside and sort of a little more medium rare towards the middle and then medium towards the edges of that. It sort of has all the temperatures in one. It's definitely not a nice flush medium rare throughout. Really, the main reason you don't want to do this is after I sliced that steak and it sat for a minute on the board, an unbelievable amount of juice came off that steak. I mean, that should all be inside the meat and thus inside your mouth. And like some sort of paper towel commercial, I actually used a piece of Bounty, right? This is the good shit, all right? None of that cheap stuff. And look how much juice comes off of that. I mean, my God, I needed another one to fully clean it up. And moving on to our good steak here, I like to rest it half as long as I cook it, but I go a little bit more than that. So if it takes 8 minutes to cook, I will rest it for 5 at least. I'll also pour a little bit of those basting juices over the steak, although juices really isn't the right word at this point. It's just pure fat, but I like to rest it in there a little bit because why not? And upon slicing into this thing, you can see really just how beautiful edge to edge medium rare it is. And because it's pan fried, of course you still get a little bit of that gray edge, but the whole thing looks like a beautiful medium rare throughout. And even just picking this steak up and setting it down and poking it and slicing through it, you can just feel how much more juice is left inside. It just feels so much more tender. And not just that, but after a proper rest, you can see using a piece of the same paper towel here just how little juice is left behind. I mean, there's really no debating that. And after all that, there's only one thing left to do, and that's a side-by-side taste test with Marcus.
Let's start with this one, but let's inspect before we taste, all right? The first thing I definitely noticed upon slicing this is the unbelievable amount of juice that was just flowing out of this thing from not resting. And you do see that gray band around the outside. You see it's not a nice flush color throughout. Having said that, it doesn't look that bad. It's not like this is gonna be like disgusting, but it's missing a lot of finesse. I'll just say that. That's the best steak I ever had in my life.
A little bit chewier, a little bit drier. You saw the paper towel.
Dude.
If you never bought Bounty, it'll soak up a crime scene.
There was probably like maybe a quarter cup, maybe a little less of juice on that board, like crazy,
Yeah.
dude. And look, it's not like it tastes bad. It tastes good, but the thing that bothers me the most is that dryness from not resting the steak. I mean, God, people are out there still saying not to rest your steaks. How can you debate that when you just saw what we did? And I'm honest on this channel. I don't pull any bullshit, camera magic, anything. Marcus can vouch for that. He's here every day. You can literally feel the difference between these. Like this one is just so much like firmer. This is the cap of the ribeye, my favorite piece of probably any steak. If you were to have this steak without this to compare it to, you'd probably be like, that's not bad. But when you have them side by side, it's like a night and day difference, dude. That's so much more tender, oh my God. It's almost like filet, right? That piece is crazy.
So much juice here. When you go side by side, this one is missing juices that this one has.
Yeah, like you have to produce more saliva to eat that thing, you know what I mean? It's like you need something to drink it with because it just doesn't go down easy. This steak, you'll remember. That steak, you'll forget, dude.
It's more evenly salty too.
It definitely has a nicer seasoning, right? We just did a better job of distributing it. One more thing I noticed about the bad steak was actually that burned butter isn't that bad. I thought it was gonna taste like way worse. I do get a little bit of bitter, but like it's not as bad as I thought it was gonna be. Although this one, like the flavor is just, oh, you have that beautiful beurre noisette.
As this sits too, it feels it's just drier and drier.
It did look way better when we had just sliced it, even though we didn't rest it.
Also, this is Sonny screwing up a steak, so this is as good as a up can be.
I don't know, I tried pretty hard to screw it up, I really did. And that's it, my friends. If you have to choose, make that one. Well, thanks for watching today, my friend. I really hope that helped you. If you happen to be a fan of written recipes, check out my Master in the Making ebook that will be linked down in the description. It has 55 very carefully selected recipes. I didn't want to put anything in that book that I thought was anywhere near being a loser. They are all true winning recipes. And if you want to keep learning today, here are 2 more steak tutorials that only have all the good tips that I was sharing today, so it will be more of a good walkthrough if you want to use that as a resource. And I've also done this exact video except completely live on YouTube, which is a really great opportunity to feel the timing of everything, right? It's almost impossible to get that with an edited video. Until next time, you know I love you and I'm out.